I will welcome to the 5th edition of the New Frontiers in Banking and Capital Markets conference. Welcome to everyone. First of all, I pass the word to the Dean of the Faculty of Economics. Welcome to the Faculty of Economics. So the word goes initially to the Dean. We have a wonderful conference coming up. Then I will pass the word to Professor Pastore. I'm very, very thankful for everybody who's here. A special thank you goes to the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, which also co-organizes this conference with us. And a special thank you, my very special personal thank you to Professor Lagasio, who makes everything possible despite certain difficulties that we have. The floor to Professor Di Bartolomeo.
Thank you, Marina. So, welcome to all of you in the name of the faculty and the rectorness, and we are very happy to have this workshop here at La Sapienza because of the very high level of our speakers. I have to thank the organizers, so I have to thank Marina Brogi and Valentina Lagasio for organizing this meeting, and I thank them also because this is not the only one they do here, so they are very active in doing this. And I thank them because this is important for our students, because for our students it's important to face people the high level has today and to look something outside of the walls of the university. So I'm particularly honored to having here our guest because I studied about his works for a long time when I was a student in the PhD and also after. And is one of my favorite economists, and this is true. It's together with Tom Sargent, Bob Lucas, and him. And I would like just to say a few words. The point is that his work is very interesting because it's very original. So you get a lot of very smart solutions to some ideas, and then when you see the work of our guests, the point is that you say, well, yes, it's like that, but nobody is able to think this before. So after the point is difficult is before, and is the person that look at these things, easy things before the others. So they are not easy, they are easy ex post, not ex ante. So welcome to all of you, and I will not be to be too long, so I will give back the word to Marina for continuing.
Thank you very much. So, Alberto Pastore, who's here.
Is it working? No, I don't think so. I think this. Sorry for the cable. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you, Marina. Thank you, Valentina, for inviting me to the opening section of the conference. So, dear friends and colleagues, as the director of the Department of Management, I'm so happy to welcome you all to Sapienza University and to the New Frontiers in Banking and Capital Market Conference that is organized by Sapienza University of Rome and the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. It's my pleasure to join the magnificent Rector Antonella Polimeni and the Dean of the Faculty of Economics, Giovanni Di Bartolomeo, in sincerely thanking Nobel Prize Laureate Professor Michael Spence for being here with us in Sapienza again. We are truly honored to host such a high personality in our university on this conference. I have seen the conference program, and it is truly extraordinary, very, very inspiring. Frontier topic of AI impact and challenges in banking and capital markets, addressed by outstanding speakers. First of all, of course, the Nobel Prize laureate Michael Spence. So, Michael, we can't wait to listen to your keynote speech. And then we will have the policy roundtable with very relevant personalities. It is going to start in a minute. And tomorrow an executive roundtable and an academic roundtable. So we will face different points of view. We will discuss about different topics with the participation of representatives of policymakers, regulators, firms, and academia at a higher level. And I'm sure that the conference will provide us with important insights into challenges and impacts of AI in banking and capital markets. And I want to congratulate so much Marina Brogi and Valentina Lagasio and the whole team for organizing such relevant and high-level event. I have to say that Marina, Valentina are really a point of excellence in the Department of Management. So I know we can't wait to get into the swing of things, so I'm going to conclude by thanking you all again for the participation and wishing you a good conference and a good stay in Rome and at Sapienza. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We also received the greetings from the rector, which I'm about to show you, but especially you see on the table here, we received a medal from the President of the Italian Republic, so, the letter which goes with it, which says, I have the pleasure of sending you the medal from the President of the Republic as a prize for the 5th edition of the International Conference New Frontiers in Banking and Capital Markets, which is programmed in Rome on the 11th and 12th of December 2023. With the prize, I am happy to send you the greetings, l'augurio for a great success for the initiative with my best regards. And so we have received the medal, so we are particularly happy. And we thank the President of the Italian Republic, who basically approves what we will be doing in the next couple of days. And this is the message from the rector.
Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, and most of all dear students, welcome you at the New Frontiers in Banking Conference promoted by Professor Marina Brogi of Management Department, Sapienza University of Rome. It's a pleasure for me to present as distinguished speaker the Nobel Prize Michael Spence, the William Berkeley Professor of Economics and Business, and the Stern Schools of Business at New York University, and the Philip Knight Professor of Management, Emeritus and Dean at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. Spence is a co-recipient of the 2001 Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Science for their analysis of markets and asymmetric information. The New Frontiers in Banking and Capital Markets Conference is aimed at providing a setting where academics, regulators, and supervisors can exchange views and discuss emerging issues interested in top academic research. Therefore, I wish to thank Professor Michael Spence for being here at Sapienza University, giving the opportunity to our students and colleagues to listen and important lessons on the topics of this conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have a a program which is a very tight schedule, so I thank you, and now I invite. While the panelists come up, I will introduce. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, distinguished panelists, and most of all, dear students. Welcome to the 5th edition of the New Frontiers in Banking and Capital Markets Conference. The objective of the conference is to provide a setting where academics and practitioners, especially regulators and supervisors, can exchange views and discuss emerging issues in top academic research. As program chairs, we try to stay ahead of the curve. The special topics of the previous editions were bank systemic risk measurement and mitigation, liquidity and shadow banking, financial crises, and last year, environmental, social, and governance. This year, the focus is on the transformative role of artificial intelligence in banking and capital markets, a theme that is reshaping the financial landscape as we know it. When Professor Valentina Lagasio in the spring of 2022 applied for the funding for this year's conference, Or indeed, when we announced the title of the 5th edition last December, we didn't know that the term AI, that is, the modeling of human mental functions by computer programs, would have been named Collins Word of the Year for 2023. It's considered to be the next great technological revolution. AI has seen rapid development and has been much talked about in 2023 and will be in the limelight both today and tomorrow. Each year, our program covers a spectrum, we hope, of pertinent topics from complementary and multidisciplinary perspectives. We commence with a policy panel, and then, as is in the tradition of this conference, Michael Spence, Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences in 2001, distinguished professor at Stanford University, will deliver his keynote speech on AI, productivity growth, and the future of interest rates and the cost of capital. I must say we're all very lucky, since it's Mike's second time. As in the previous 2 editions of this conference that were held in Sapienza, we also had the pleasure of presenting 2 of his fellow Nobel laureates, Rob Engle, Nobel Prize winner in 2003, and Jean Tirole, Nobel Prize winner in 2007. So every year we always have a Nobel Prize winner for the keynote address. So we want at the same time to provide insights to policymakers and supervisors. And we like policy panels like the ones we have today, in which we will have the opportunity of understanding the challenges presented by competition or complementarity between private and public markets. As these markets continue to evolve, public and private markets, they shape economies, influence policy making, and have profound implications for investors, businesses, and regulators alike. Understanding these markets is crucial for predicting future trends, safeguarding financial stability, and fostering sustainable and inclusive economic growth. The panel promises to be a rich exchange of ideas, shedding light on the complexities, challenges, and opportunities within these markets. As our keynote speaker, Mike Spence, put it in his extraordinarily insightful book, Permacrisis, we will have to find ways, I quote, to re-establish the financial sector as the true servant of the economy. Today's panelists, with their diverse backgrounds from central banking to financial oversight, banking and markets, regulation, supervision and practice, and their front-row roles position them uniquely to provide us with very comprehensive insights. More specifically, a brief introduction on the 3 of them, in alphabetical order. Carlo Comporti is Commissioner Consob, Italy's public authority responsible for regulating the Italian securities market since February 2022. His extensive career includes serving as the CEO of Promontory Italy and Chief Operating Officer of Promontory Europe. Promontory Europe is an IBM consulting business unit of IBM from 2011 to 2022. Previously, he was Director General of Promontory France, so extensive international experience and both a public policy independent authority background and a practitioner background. So he has both angles. Ugo Loeser is the CEO and General Manager of Arca Fondi SGR since 2011. He brings to the table over 3 decades of experience in the financial sector. He has been CEO and General Manager of Arca Fondi since 2011 and has a degree in economics and social sciences from the Bocconi University of Milan. Actually, his main plus is that he was a colleague of mine at university. So, this is why he's here really. But he's just back from a very interesting conference in New York that I think he will mention. Last but not least, to my right, Alessandra Perrazzelli is the Deputy Governor of the Bank of Italy since 2019. Again, a notable career in finance and law. Not only is she now serving as Deputy Governor for the Bank of Italy, she's a lawyer, and she's also worked in other real-life experiences. She was Vice President of she was Vice President of A2A, which is the Italian, which is the municipality of Milan and Brescia. She was a board member of Monte Titoli, country manager of Barclays in Italy, and at Intesa Sanpaolo she was head of international regulatory relations. So 3 people with complementary backgrounds, but which combine their current supervisory or regulatory positions with full understanding of what actually the economy needs. So I think very, very interesting for us all. Now, let me turn to why we started thinking about this policy panel and why we decided to think about private and public markets. In the European equity markets, there's been a trend of de-equitization for a long time. There are fewer companies opting for public listings and more leaving the market. This is exactly the same situation in Italy, where prominent firms have delisted from the Milan Stock Exchange due to factors like lower share prices and governance preferences. Just to give you an idea, these are OECD numbers. In the 1990s, European non-financial companies, mainly from the UK, Germany, France, and Italy, played a leading role in the global scene of IPOs, accounting for 41% of all capital raised, with over 3,500 listings during that period. Since then, European IPOs have declined, both in absolute and relative terms. European non-financial companies raised only 24% of the total equity capital raised by IPOs in the 2001-2011 period, and then only 90%, i.e. less than a fifth, between 2012 and 2022. In contrast, Asian companies have significantly increased their participation in global equity markets, from raising 22% of global IPO proceeds during the 90s to 44% in the 2012-2022 period. In Italy, notable firms like Exor, Atlantia, Autogrill, and Tod's were among the biggest names to delist from the Milan stock market. Actually, also AES Roma, but it's not such a big company. 9 companies exited the Italian market, but 13 small new companies entered. However, concern about the market's attractiveness and structural issues like governance and liquidity remain significant. Now let me turn to the questions to our esteemed and distinguished panelists, and I'm going to start with Carlo. The market cap of the Italian Stock Exchange continues to represent a far lower... Okay, I can swap, that's fine. I can do that easily. But yeah, but I can decide. So private and public markets. We're going to begin with private equity and private capital in Italy, and especially a forward-looking perspective from Alessandra Perrazzelli. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marina, and hello to all the students and all the guests. Very happy to be here. Now, let me give you my point of view. In my daily work, I am a supervisor of banks and financial institutions, and I do this in Italy, and I do this also at European level in the ECB. We have a system whereby the Eurosystem has a supervisory board, and that's where I sit. Why do I start here? Because I just want to tell you that given the fact that we're talking about artificial intelligence today, technology is changing our landscape as supervisor in a dramatic way. It's very much a revolution. It's about artificial intelligence, but it's also about a lot of other technology that gets applied today by intermediaries, and this is something that I share very much with Carlo in his work at Consob, and it's changing the way in which banks are designing their business models. What does that mean? That means that in order to, survive to this change, and in order also to compete with, operators that come from outside the perimeter of the banking industry. Think about the big tech who's starting to work in payment systems, and slowly they're creeping in also in everything which is banking services, okay? think about what Apple is doing in the United States, the deal that it made with Goldman Sachs, and very rapidly Goldman Sachs realized that, that was a dangerous, dance that they were doing, and they walk out of that agreement. So all of that, it's creating more demand for capital, more demand for investments, more demand for a change at regulatory level. Coming back, so we're zooming out, let's zoom into Europe, and let's zoom in also in this country, and what do we see? We see a system whereby credit and investment is very much still led by banks, okay? And banks have a limited appetite for risk, also because they're subject to our supervision, and we're very strict, and we demand a lot of capital adequacy every time they, factor in new risks, and risks that come from technology are unknown to them until now. We're only now starting to set rules in order to measure them, and this is also true for climate change with everything which is ESG. So the issue now is, do industry have enough recourse to capital, which is other than banking capital? There's a little bit of a, okay, you can hear me? Yeah, okay. All right, so where do we stand then in terms of making sure that in the Euro system, industry, banking industry, and also other industries have access to financing, to have access to those means that are necessary in order to, get rid of their IT legacy, because this is what it is. There is a lot of IT legacy still in the banking industry, and have access, therefore, to a better level of technical support. I mean, artificial intelligence, we'll talk about that, but I mean, at the end of the day, it's really all about investment and skills, all right? So you need money in order to acquire new technology, you need money in order to acquire new skills, and where do they go? The issue is that we do not have yet a perfected banking union, and we're far from having a capital union that allows operators to go cross-border, the national states, and have access to funding which goes beyond the very limited national systems. This is clearly an issue for the Italian market, where we have, lots of difficulty, also a level of rules to make sure that the industry, the non-banking industry, is actually flourishing and growing. I think Carlo will tell us all about it. So I think that's where we stand now. And if today we had at the Banca d'Italia, we had a meeting for a farewell to the chair of the SSM, Andrea Enria, who's leaving at the end of this month his position. And one of the questions that the banking industry had for him was really this, when and where can we expect to have a union that is going to allow us to compete also with the big tech and with everything that is coming from the unregulated market, all right? So I think it's clear to you what is regulated and unregulated market. Banks are subject to supervision, so they're subject to capital sort of like increases every time they have to face new risks and risks that they have to factor in when they want to, make sure that they understand how exposed they are to the business. This is not true for the big tech. The big tech can kind of roam around, and the only issues that they have, the issues are more connected to everything which is reaching out to customers, so they're market-oriented issues more than regulatory issues. I will stop here, Marina, so that we can continue with the flow, and then I'll come back when you tell me.
Thank you very much, Alessandra. So Alessandra well depicted what the challenges lie ahead for the private markets and for regulators, etc. But of course, public markets play a role, and it can be an important role, and maybe it should be an important role. And the market cap of the Italian stock exchange is still a far lower percentage of GDP for Italy than for other countries, which means that actually Italian companies could go public and don't. And some smaller companies do, but large caps tend to delist. And even though we said the equitization is a worldwide problem, what do you think the priorities should be to make the Italian public market more attractive, especially for Italian issuers? Because we do have a lot of small and medium and even large, potentially large cap companies which could list. Do you think that the Capital Markets Union help?
First, let me thank you and the university for this kind invitation, and also apologize for this switch. But in reality, I would have quoted Christine Lagarde. Now I can quote Alessandra Perrazzelli, okay? Because the words I would have started with responding to your question are exactly the ones that Alessandra put it in the right order. That means that we are facing important challenges for important transitions that deserve a lot of funding. This fund cannot be, and these are coming from the banking community, okay? These funds cannot be guaranteed for different reasons, and Alessandra already, let's say, elaborated on these from the banking sector. So looking traditionally at the different channels, we have, let's say, the banking, and Alessandra already clarified. We are in a region, we are in a continent where, let's say, the economy is heavily funded through the banking sector, and the recent indicators continue to show that this is rather increasing rather than decreasing, okay? So that the context is rather important. Then the second point is that there is a need, and how to cope with this need. And here comes to your question. There are alternative channels. Historically, these, let's say, needs would have been filled by the role of public markets. What does it mean? That, let's say, clearly companies going public would have found the necessary let's say, funding for ensuring whatever kind of transition, including the generation transition, including the technological transition, including the governance transition, okay? All these kind of issues, for different reasons, let's say, have come to, I don't want to a stop, but really slow down. And the assessment of the reasons why globally there has been a slowdown is something that worries us as a community of securities regulators, not because we are against the other players that are coming in, that are the private, let's say, funds and the private markets. I will say a few words. It's a policy, let's say, round table, so I will say a few words also in terms of policy. But we are concerned that the potential slowdown in terms of the public markets to feed these funding needs may really hamper the overall objectives. Overall objectives, first, with the growth, that was the first objective of the Capital Markets Union. You reminded to facilitate the condition for the growth of the European level. But then, of course, for the specific, more, let's say, urgent transitions, and Alessandra reminded very well, I would call the green and the tech transition. Now, where do we stand? I don't think that we should think in terms of it's a balance that should be struck. Okay, I think that the best is a sort of complementarity, not necessarily looking at these in competition. I don't think that the banking sector is competing with the private funds. Okay, by the way, if we look at the public markets and the banking sector, there are a lot of, let's say, overlaps and complementarities between the two. So I don't think that the key word is competition, but rather complementarity. The problem is that, as I said, in the recent years, this balance really is shifting in favor of the private markets. There should be reasons. And understanding the reasons is the best way we can do in order to address, let's say, and to restore a more favorable balance. Now, traditionally, if we look at what the analysis that try to understand the reasons, that again is a global trend, I will say a few words about this, is put in terms of high cost and the high complexity of the regulatory framework. High cost of the IPOs. The IPOs normally cost a lot, it is true, and the ongoing compliance, it is also costing. And second is the complexity of the regulatory framework that to some extent makes life of firms once public, let's say to some extent, not as easy as if they were being or remaining private. Now, looking at things in more detail, and we started doing, particularly, say, since I'm in this current job, looking at the outflows. So I want to introduce a second important argument, or step in my sequence of arguments. The first is that there are not sufficient new IPOs, no new coming to public, okay? But we observe a lot of outgoing, delisting, okay? When I saw from Japan that Toshiba delisted last month, I say, oh wow, it is not just in Italy. But from the observatory where I sit, almost on a weekly basis, we observe takeover bids, let's say, driven by the objective of delisting. Now, if we take all these, so we may consider that going public, there are these reasons that may hamper or be an obstacles, but why they delist? And looking at the numbers, in reality, you understand that there is a problem in valuation in the current markets, public markets. And the private markets are, let's say, better off in capturing the extra value that still remains, that is probably unexpressed in the current valuations, and is captured by the private markets in delisting, offering to shareholders, let's say, best value, or capturing just before the listing, okay? Probably, of course, a promising less complex environment, more certainty about the time to market. That is also an issue. If you stay months to prepare the listing and then you tap the market in the bad moment, that is really an issue in itself. So there is a combination of factors rather than, honestly, I don't believe that the cost is the real or the only driver, but there is a combination of factors that really make the life of a public market more difficult. Why we are worried? We are worried for two reasons. The first is that public market expresses some sort of a public good. There is an intrinsic valuation, let's say, contribution to the valuation that public markets, let's say, offer publicly, that is a driver for good valuation. That, in my view, is a public good. If we make these price discovery mechanism or valuation mechanism, even if not fully efficient, let's say, meaningless, then I think that the market itself would suffer from these. But then there is another one, and here is the balance between the newcomers. For different reasons, in the last decade, the private funds have been exposed to a very important, let's say, exponential, let's say, increase. But in reality, since most of them, and I want to differentiate between the ones that are subject to regulation and supervision as opposed to the ones that are not subject to regulation and supervision, they are exposed to high level of opacity. That means that in itself, also for the large size of their assets under portfolio, they may give rise to potential threats to financial stability without having the full capacity to explore what's inside. And these combined with high leverage of their portfolio and their strategies, these may exacerbate the risk that are embedded in. On the solution, I think that we may come back to the second round.
Second round. Thank you very much, Carlo. Let me turn to Ugo. If we look at the situation, very often large delistings entail private equity investors together with the entrepreneur or somebody who has an entrepreneurial background or the existing owners. There are cases like this. And I think to Carlo's point, it's true that there is an issue regarding valuations. Because of course, if the private equity investor comes in, the company is delisted, and from the inside things change. And actually, a measure of performance, EBITDA, improves. Oh, that's fine. The company is better run, and so it's good that the private equity investor has gone in, and things have improved. However, sometimes the increase in value is more driven by multiples, and the relevant multiples are either seen on the market or are deriving from a secondary market between private equity investors, but that is certainly more opaque, as Carlo was saying. So the two questions for you are, how do you see the private markets and public markets dilemma, let me call it, in the current landscape, given that we no longer have the negative interest rate environment that we had before? And at the same time, what about the different cost structure for retail investors? So is it better to have a larger public market? Because at the end of the day, the financial wealth is in the retail investor, who can either go through mutual funds on the public markets or a longer chain of intermediaries. So how do you see that evolving? What are the cost structures like? Thank you very much.
Thank you. And first of all, let me congratulate the faculty for this event. I think bringing such academics and Michael Spence in front of students should be one of the mission of every university to motivate students. And I'm very honored to be part of this event and to give my very little contribution. Regarding private markets, clearly the story is that we are in a bubble driven by negative rates. And there are different indications of a bubble. One is that if you look at the number of companies listed, now it's about half of what they were 20, 25 years ago. This is worldwide. And if you don't see that in market caps, is because we have the giants of the tech sector. But if you look in terms of number of companies, they are one half of what they were. Second, my personal indication is that one company, when I started, if you look at 20 years ago, a private equity company that would run 5 billion would be huge. And now we have a company, which is Blackstone, which runs 1 trillion, and whose CEO is paid more than 1 billion. That's a measure of bubble. But having said that, I think there are some fundamental reasons why is a trend that will continue, and why clearly has been accelerated and distorted by negative rates. But now that we are in a positive rates environment, we don't see the trend subsiding rapidly. And clearly the way I look at it is that private markets are a disruptor of financial markets that will deeply impact the institutional setup of a financial industry. My example, which is in the press today, is that if you look at the Italian numbers, private financial wealth in Italy is 4 trillion. Okay? Now, when the Italian government needed to negotiate the carving out of a digital network in front of 4 trillion of private financial wealth, had to sit with an American player, which is named KKR, as the only counterparts, reliable counterparts, to carve out and sell such a strategic asset. Clearly, if public market would have been the answer, the Italian market could have, the Italian government could have easily forced the listing of a network, making it a public asset, and the revenues and profits of such a strategic asset would have benefited the public as a whole. Now, there are some structural reasons, I would say, why both entrepreneurs and investors prefer to go private. It has, without going into much depth, it has to do with being having a long time horizon, which is only relevant for private asset. Meanwhile, public asset have a daily pricing and daily liquidity, which constrains a lot of the things you can do with the capital you raise. Second, there are some processes for which the financial investors that sits on your board adds discipline, methodology, and expertise, especially when you're looking at processes like innovation, internationalization, and talent management, which are much better carried on having a private equity, and we can see it in all the successful examples that we confront. And finally, by going deeply into the company's business model, processes, the private equity investor is a lot more aware of what are the value creation possibility, and is prepared to pay a much higher price than public markets, because public markets have limited information, and the asymmetry of information is penalizing valuation. And regulation can solve part of those problems, but cannot be a substitute for having a company through a development process by sitting on the board. And my sense is that we had just a little taste of what is coming with private equity, but the big revolution will be private debt, when we will have now a regulation which is imposing much tougher capital rules on banks, realizing that banks are very difficult to regulate. And the experience of Credit Suisse this year, I think, is enlightening. Credit Suisse is a SIB, systemically important bank. If you go on the site of the Financial Stability Board, which is the, I would say, consortium of central banks which regulates a systemically important bank, you will read the reporting requirement on the systemically important bank, which are incredible, and you wonder, how can it be possible that a systemically important bank hits the market with a 17 billion default on subordinated debt? And therefore, the pressure of a different model of less intermediation by bank through risk transformation and shifting the risk directly to investor is big. And when you're talking about total debt, you're talking about a number which is monstrous. If you look at total non-financial debt, is 3 times world GDP, roughly. So you're talking in the region of 300 trillion of non-financial debt, which is in the world today. And this intermediating, the big part of it, will change the profile of the financial industry. And again, a lot of the public debt also needs to find different ways of financing. There was a recent article on the Wall Street Journal, I think 2 Thursdays ago, we were showing that given the increasing interest rates, public debt servicing will go from 1 trillion to 3 trillion in 2 years. So there are 2 trillion extra cost. Therefore, a lot of the initiatives will need to find a different form of financing to be sustainable. And clearly, private markets are probably the answer relative to the banking system. And that will transform the asset management, the banking system, and will pose, as the Credit Suisse episode showed, unprecedented challenges on regulations to regulate private markets in credit, which will be a lot more difficult than in private equity.
Thank you very much. Let me turn back to Alessandra Perrazzelli, because I know that, because I had a sneak preview of what Mike is going to say later, because I read his wonderful book called Permacrisis, that innovation, technology are possibly the solution, okay? And so in this second round, I would like to ask you something regarding technology and its impact on our future. And of course, private capital can foster innovation, but at the same time, it's also important that it's that it's not the sort of, as you were saying before, I quote, big techs can roam around without any sort of regulation, supervision, whatever. So there may be problems. People don't really understand, don't know. So on the one hand, you have to safeguard stability and safety of the financial industry. At the same time, private capital can foster innovation. So it also needs institutions' involvement. What is the Bank of Italy's approach on this?
Thank you so much, Marina. Now, I happen to teach a class on these things, somewhere else, and really the main issue here is that how we want to approach this big revolution that is coming into these markets through technology, whether we just should let it happen and try and get as many fruits as we can get, or whether we should intervene and regulate what's going on here. I mean, you're all familiar with crypto. You've seen, the development of bitcoins and issued on blockchains, and we all became familiar with all these words. And some of you have invested in these, new things, and some of you maybe made some money. Some of you maybe lost some money. So the big issue for a central bank is how do you look at all this and trying to keep a stability in the market, and at the same time you do not kill innovation, all right? Because this is like, innovation is like spring, it happens. It's not like you can stop it. But how do you make sure that it happens in a way which, first of all, brings to clients, to consumers, good services, that it's inclusive, that does not create barriers, does not create does not enlarge discrimination. You know, there's an issue about, for instance, the use of technology based on algorithm and the inability sometimes to go inside algorithm, regulate them, understand what are the issues, you know, what are the elements of the algorithm that are used in order to organize, say, you know, credit risk scoring, okay? Banks more and more are using algorithms to understand whether they should give you a loan or not. All right, and these algorithms very often they're a lot stricter than the human intervention and the way in which we analyze the risk that a person may present when it comes to, for instance, asking a loan. All right, so this is very much what we are facing today. I mean, whether we should regulate, how we should regulate, what's going to happen in the competition with the banking sector in the moment in which you see more technology-driven companies coming into the financial services market. I mean, think about this and think about like a central bank, all right? We are full of economists, which is a good thing. We're full of legal people, which is also a very good thing. But are we equipped to understand what's going on in a way that, you know, makes our rules also reaching out, understanding what the problem is, and offering the right solutions? So that's why we have started to, first of all, hire a number of people that, you know, traditionally you don't find in central banks, which are a bunch of engineers, data analysts, you know, and people that have studied maths and physics and all sorts of different disciplines in that area. Second of all, we started to look at the market with a different approach. I mean, as you can imagine, we are subject to administrative law, okay? So when we face banks and when we face intermediaries, we have a set of rules that comes from a very written rules. It's a code. It's called Testo Unico Bancario, which, you know, for the Italians, you know, it's a one piece of legislation which has been updated over the years, but it's our Bible. That's how, you know, we regulate the interface with banks and with financial institutions. So according to these rules, basically we do provide a number of tracks on which companies, banks have to move, and they are pretty much based on, you know, capital supervision. So you stock more money in order to face new risks. I mean, it's a basic rule, and we also have to always have enough money aside when you're facing new risks, and these are the rules. They're based, you know, they're called the Basel, you know, rules. By the way, you know, the American regional banks do not apply these rules, and they're not subject to the kind of supervision that European banks are, you know, subject to. And there you go with Silicon Valley Bank, all right? These things do not happen because of an act of God. They happen because you don't have enough money put aside, and you don't have a strong enough regulator that tells you what you need to do. I mean, this is so that we clear the issue. So regulators and rules are necessary in order to keep things going. All right. So what do we do here? Basically, we started to work through an innovation center. It's a hub that Banca d'Italia has opened, and we started to work with newcomers, with old banks, with, you know, research centers, through call for proposals. So they're like, you know, we send out a specific issue. We say, you know, the first one that we did was on artificial intelligence in the financial, banking, and insurance world. And we see what kind of responses we got through from the industry. It's been a fascinating journey. We also had a second call on the application of DLT, and in January we probably will launch our third call. So we're newborn, okay? It's 2 years this innovation hub has been active in the market. What do we see here? First of all, we see how the industry is using technology to change your business model, okay? So it's a first-hand experience that we have on how they do it. what do they, you know, what kind of goal they put for themselves, how they process, how they think, you know, those solutions can be factored into, say, a chain of you know, procedures when it comes to compliance. And by working with them, so we select 10 of these projects, okay? And these 10 projects, they are coached by our people at the Banca d'Italia. And in the process, it's about 6 to 9 months coaching, okay? And we'll look at them, and we'll look at how they do it. We look at how, you know, what kind of rules they need, because the other thing is, and, you know, and Ugo has said this very clearly, we do not have champions here in Europe. I mean, it's very true. You know, I was in Singapore, and they were telling me, you Europeans you're very good at, you know, setting rules, but where is the industry? And this is so true, right? So we also want to see development of new industry in our country, and hopefully in Europe. So through this coach that we do, this coaching exercise, we learn, we understand what is that they need in terms of investment, rules, people, market access, you know, cooperation, because we also have a sandbox together with Consob. And in that sandbox, for instance, is another, you know, we also look at more regulatory sort of the development together with the other authorities. And on the other side, these companies, they start learning about the tracks, right? The tracks, you know, those rules and those safeguards that need to be put in place so that they can develop a, you know, a project, you know, a product that is actually sustainable. And let me say something here about sustainability, which sustainability means a lot of things. Sustainable in terms of being able to survive in a market and being able to thrive in that market and being able to become in the European market. I had the experience, you know, a few years ago, you know, while I was in the States studying there, of a lot of startups that they were, you know, come into life and die, you know, very suddenly and very quickly. And I asked myself, well, what's the story here? You know, there's so great ideas. And the thing that surprised me, because the money is there, all right? So it's not like for us, you know, there's more ability to sustain also from the private sector, from private capital, the development of new ideas. They basically didn't have the jargon. They didn't know how to talk about what they were doing to regulators, because they were moving into a forest of different rules, because we're talking about financial services. We're talking about your money, my money. We're talking about stability of our financial industry, right? It's not like when you start, like I always say, and I say to my students, you're not entering into manufacturing, you know, dishwashers, okay, where you just have to look at standards, you know, make sure that you apply those standards, or you're done. Here you're walking into a sector that requires a true knowledge, you know, of what are the rules are, what are the risks that you are going to encounter, and how you make yourself sustainable for a life, you know, of your company. So the effort that we're trying to produce, Marina, is really one of making this is happening here and now, because we think that in order to foster also the growth of private capital, we need to have more actors, and we also need to bring to the attention of, you know, our legislators what, you know, it's happening in the Italian market. It's difficult because, you know, it requires a long period of time, but I think that the effort now that there is a much more awareness also in the relationship that we have, for instance, with Consob. You know, we're together right now, we're facing everything which is the regulation of crypto assets, for instance, you know, with the application of MiCAR. And it's going to be between, you know, Consob and Banca d'Italia. how to make sure that you actually regulate this market in a safe and sound way for the sustainability of not to shut down, but to create a safe environment for all these newcomers are going to operate to the benefit of consumers, first of all, and the stability of our system.
Thank you very much. I turn to Ugo. What you see in terms of the role that emerging technologies could have on liquidity, because we talked about some of the valuation issues, but a part of the story regarding public markets, but also private markets, is technology. And do you think that technologies will improve liquidity? If so, how? And how is it shaping your decision making at Arca?
Thank you. Clearly, technology is reshaping the whole financial industry. Today, we are confronted with two big branches of technology development. On one side, there are DLTs, distributed ledger technology, and on the other, artificial intelligence, and probably working on the same data set and abilities. I personally believe that DLT and blockchain are very transformative in all what will concern the infrastructure. As every innovation, it started, it went into a bubble, it blew up, you find a lot of scam, and it's extremely complex. Despite on what you read that seems simple, I realize it's extremely complex in understanding all the aspect of DLT, of digital currency, and of tokenization of securities. In our company, in Arca, I forced everyone to go through a program in understanding. We all enrolled, including myself, in the MIT program, which is taught by Gary Gensler, who was running the Tokyo office of Goldman Sachs when I was working there. And we realized it's extremely complex, but extremely powerful. And clearly, that will change potentially all the security services industry and payment industry. Clearly is so disruptive but central banks are really careful, and rightly so, because letting a digital currency out without having forecasted all the consequences is very dangerous. It could create a huge problem on commercial banks' liability, because there is no reason to hold a deposit if you can access directly the central bank liability structure. So it could deleverage completely the economy. And second, a digital currency, a digital payment, could be Ethereum, could be Bitcoin, could be the digital euro, is programmable potentially. So it will create digital intermediaries that can substitute physical intermediaries. Instead of seeing myself here, you could see a robot talking tomorrow based on programmable, what is called the smart contract version, of which the tokenization is part of. You're seeing a lot of the non-fungible token story, which was a big bubble, but that's what's coming. Basically, you can create a complex object and transfer its value on the blockchain. So that will impact what is a huge industry, which is the custody and security services industry. And in that respect, and all the exchanges, which clearly insist on the custodian. And there is a huge challenges in regulating that, because today you have very defined roles between the custodian, the broker, and the exchange. Tomorrow, with the blockchain DLT, these three roles which guarantee the control and the protection will be blurred. And so who is the custodian, who is the broker, who is the exchange is not clear. And if you have seen the recent scams, the latest one being Binance, is because those roles were mixed. And there is no way of redefining those roles in the new technology. And that concerns the infrastructure of the market. So yes, shifting value across players will be a lot simpler, a lot more effective in the future. And if you make a comparison, we'll like sending a message through WhatsApp, and the new technology will enable you, instead of sending a message, to send a payment, for a tokenized security at zero cost. Like today, I can say I landed fine to a friend in the US at no cost. If I have to send a payment of 30 cents to a bank in the US, it will cost me $20 today. That will disappear. So liquidity will improve and cost of exchanges will decrease. And by the way, that will disrupt an industry which accounts for billions of revenues, probably hundreds of thousands of jobs. And so we have to be very careful. The second impact will be on artificial intelligence. Now, the financial industry has been at the forefront of using quantitative methods and technology to process information. But so far, the industry has been able to do that when it was confronted with numbers. Any numbers we were able to process. I started my career with Fisher Black and Bob Litterman, and then with a lot of Scott Rich, Bob Litzenberger, and building quantitative models to make financial decisions. Could be derivative, could be asset allocation, could be term structure models. We couldn't process qualitative information. Now, qualitative. Now artificial intelligence does that for qualitative information. Credit scoring, sentiment, and a lot of models that could impact. And in that could become very dangerous, but also very powerful. Regulated, that will be a priority, exactly like has been DLT.
So, very interesting. What I found striking is how AI is now used to understand how CFOs and CEOs present their numbers to the public. And if you're somewhat different and if you pause a little bit more, then they perceive that vis-a-vis whatever you've said, in any case, the news is bad. And I thought this was really striking and somewhat, worrying, because, they speak faster and faster, but not necessarily, that should be the way to assess fundamental value. But given all that we've heard, Carlo, how can and how should the regulatory framework adapt to make sure that the technological landscape, we take the good of technology, but without the bad? And for both private and public markets, what do you think are the key challenges and opportunities in this context? And then we know that Alessandra needs to go, so shortly.
And I cannot pause, because otherwise I show some hesitation. Okay, so I will not hesitate, straight to the point. Clearly, the first is we had to look at in various directions. It is not just one silver bullet that makes a difference. You asked for some examples. By the way, we have been trying in Italy in recent directions, say, to give very good examples, but to be honest, I think it's a long journey. It's a long journey. The point that were made by Ugo really shows that this trend is going to remain, and we have to counter. We have to, I don't say necessarily counter, but we have to find the right, let's say, arguments and tools to address the new environment. What does it mean? It means first reviewing probably whether we have been going too far in the rule-making, let's say, framework. We have been, and normally is the right way forward. We have been adopting a number of rules in the aftermath of the financial crisis. I would say, unfortunately, is becoming back into the tables, is martial law. Now we have to look at things in peacetime, okay? So we have to review whether certain rules that were introduced for the good reasons, now in more stability, we should not try to clean up a little bit of these. And I think that probably here and there are some rules for more striking another balance into the proportionality. There are good examples. Most of our rules are coming from Europe. The Listing Act, for instance. Listing Act is trying to strike a good balance for SMEs, but try to think for 1 minute at what this means in terms of policy. Alessandra rightly mentioned the fact that disruption makes also casualties down the road. Who should bear the consequences of these? SMEs, by definition, there will be some productive and very innovative and successful SMEs, but there may be others that will not be able to have the same luck and success. Should we, let's say, allow for these failures to be hit, let's say, the pockets of retail investors? We need to be careful. And also the target of, let's say, who are the holder of certain investments of certain, we should consider. This brings me to another market structure. We need probably to work on long-term investors. We have not enough, and that is probably why, one of the reasons why our European markets are not as developed as in other regions. We don't have sufficient, let's say, long-term, such as pension funds. We don't have long-term with long, let's say, time horizon. And these, we cannot believe that necessarily the retail investors are these kinds of investors. We have good projects still in the regulatory side that are the consolidated tape that brings together all the trading environment into one single mechanism, and the ESAP, that is another, let's say, consolidation of all the data points related to European issuers. So there are a number of different, let's say, actions that are underway, but I think that the best way is clearly to reassess whether what we're doing really helps achieving the objectives that so far, to be honest, in the Capital Markets Union have not been achieved, let's say, as much as we would have hoped. So the last point is on the market, let's say, functioning. I think that we need to bring more liquidity, and again, it's a matter of having long-term investors, but also probably looking at the market structures, the microstructure of how the markets, let's say, function and behave. Regarding digital innovations, I think that there are, in the recent retail investment strategy, the ambition of regulating where we could expect that digitalization brings benefits for retail investors, and I think that there are a lot, but also to try to keep this innovation, let's say, in a comfort space, I would say, from the retail investor perspectives and protection. I will stop here, knowing that we cannot mention, particularly in a country that has always difficult, let's say, capacity, but some incentives also from the tax perspective, let's say, could also help push some public funding or, let's say, incentives into IPOs, particularly in the innovative sector. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Carlo. Thank you very much to all our three distinguished panelists for being here. And so we hope to welcome you back again soon. Thank you very much. So now it is my great honor and pleasure to welcome to the table Professor Spence. So, since I know that you're all all looking forward to his speech, just like myself. And while Professor Lagasio gets the slides up, I'm going to shorten my speech regarding his presentation, as Professor Spence needs really no presentation, but I'm going to borrow from his latest book, which is called Permacrisis, A Plan to Fix a Fractured World. By the way, Permacrisis was the Collins Word of the Year for 2022. So that's where I got the idea from AI before. And here we have a brief description of one of the authors, Mike Spence, who is here with us. And the book is co-authored with Mohamed El-Erian and Gordon Brown, with the help of Reed Lido. Now, Mike has done it all, from serving as the Dean of Stanford Graduate School of Business to advising some of the world's leading companies and governments. He's currently a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution and Philip H. Knight Professor Emeritus at Stanford Graduate School of Business. He was the chairman of an independent commission on growth and development focused on growth and poverty reduction in developing countries. In 2001, he was awarded the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences for his contributions to the analysis of markets with asymmetric information. He also received the John Bates Clark Medal of the American Economic Association, awarded to economists under 40. His theories on economic growth and competition have changed how the world conducts business, and he has served on the board of directors of a number of public and private companies. His book is actually a call to action for each of us to collaborate to solve the permacrisis. It's actually a set of measures that can be adopted, and tonight he will give us his reflections on artificial intelligence, productivity, growth, and the future of interest rates and the cost of capital. Before handing over to Mike, I would like to point out that we are very lucky to have him in Sapienza, and I'm personally very happy to see here many of my students. And we have a number of high potential students in Sapienza, as some of our alumni testify, because where you are sitting now, we had people like Mario Draghi, Ignazio Visco, Pietro Salini, and a number of important entrepreneurs, which I'm not going to list because the list would be too long. It's very important for students to have positive role models and to be able to learn from the best, as is certainly the case of Michael Spence. Thank you very much for being here.
I'm going to try to use this because I hate holding a mic for that long. Well, at my age, I get tired. Marina, thank you. I'm thrilled to be back again this year, and it's just stimulating to talk with the young people. And the panel you just heard was superb, and it delivers exactly the right message. Which we have these very powerful technologies coming at us, and we don't really know yet how to handle it. So we're, the humble and honest among us, and that panel was a superb example of that, are going to figure it out in real time. And we'll get there. There'll be some bumps along the road because we don't have a clear sense of where we're going. So I'll give you one view today. I'll try to do it fairly efficiently. And I guess my story, as it will emerge, kind of has three parts. So I'm going to how do I do this? Oh, I got you. I have to use the mouse. I haven't used a mouse in so long. This may not work. So this is a book. These are old friends of mine, or long-standing friends. I'm the oldest. And we were talking with each other in the pandemic, and we realized that there was a pretty complex and kind of bumpy world that we were living in. And at some point, after almost 2 years, we said maybe we should write something. It's a bit over the top, the title. Nobody has a plan to fix a fractured world, but we were hoping we could suggest, A, that with some thought, it isn't as confusing as it is initially, and second, maybe there are some baby steps we could take in a direction that would improve matters a little bit, at least in the longer term. So what I'm going to talk about is, the reason we wrote this book is we're seeing the collision of three, very powerful sets of forces. One are the shocks and crises that are being delivered to the global economy with increasing frequency and severity, and those shocks include wars, pandemics, climate shocks that are now major macroeconomic events because of their scope, the insurance industries in turmoil, etc. Second, and this is perhaps more controversial, so this is where I will, suggest that there were some missing pieces in the way people thought about the world, is I believe we're in a kind of regime change in the structure, in the fundamental structure of the global economy on the supply side. So I will try to give you at least some information that suggests that that might be true, in the hope that people who are younger and smarter than I am, go ahead and try to figure out whether it's true or not. And the third, and all of these things were happening in parallel, is we have these enormously powerful transformations underway. This multi-decade digital one, which we just heard something about, the more recent chapters. And by the way, the most recent chapters are not the last chapters. I mean, I don't know. And I've now tried to spend a fair amount of time with my colleagues at Stanford in AI, because I thought, I'm not going to understand this reading the AFT for sure. And they don't think we're at the end either. Maybe closer to the middle or even the start. And so we have a revolution in biomedical and life sciences. There's a huge overlap between that and the digital transformation. And I'll show you some powerful technologies and tools just because they're interesting. If I run out of time, I'll leave the slides behind and you can look at them. And finally, we have this massive energy transition that they're wrestling with at COP28 that we have to go through in order to achieve sustainability. All of this coming at the same time. And there are a couple of related trends that I probably won't have time. One is, when I was, maybe even 20 years ago, you could probably count on the fingers of two hands the really powerful, local ecosystems that generated most of the sort of technology innovation startups. They're not true anymore. It's a global phenomenon. There's 91 unicorns in India. China's second to the United States. There's 25 in Paris, 20 in Berlin. A ton of them, not a ton, but a lot in Latin America, and a few emerging in African countries. It really is quite striking. There are multinational players on the financing company building side that have helped make this possible, but there's just an explosion of local talent that enables you to adapt these models of financing to local conditions to solve local problems. Really quite striking. And, we had a lot of time tonight. I described what's happened in India. It's just truly remarkable. With the geo-revolution, 400 million new subscribers. The biometric identification system, so people actually know who they are. Now the universal payments interface, which I think is so good that it may get imitated across the globe. Basically, it solves essentially, in the digital side of the financial payment sector, all the interconnects. So it's a level playing field. All the banks can play, anybody who chooses to, and so on. And the best test of this is that in the rural areas that used to be almost cash dependent, completely cash dependent, they now use their mobile phones to transfer money around. It's kind of seamlessly. I mean, it's really quite amazing. So there's an inclusive dimension to the digital revolution that I've always found pretty intriguing. Okay, so here we go. I'm basically going to start with the regime change and then argue that we've fairly, this is overstating it a bit, but moved from a largely demand-constrained, meaning where demand was the gating factor, especially after the great financial crisis, to a supply-constrained world. The consequences of that shift, including in the financial sector for interest rates and capital. I'm going to take this as a kind of guess on my part, and if you disagree, that's good. That's why we wrote the book. And then I'll talk about these major transformations and suggest that when I look out at the next 2 to 3 years, it looks pretty tough, right? We've got 2 wars going on. We've got declining productivity. I'm giving you a preview of what I'm about to say. We've got, slowing growth almost everywhere, with a possible exception of some of the Southeast Asian countries, but certainly globally. We have sovereign debt to GDP globally at over 100%, aging populations in countries that account for well over 75% of GDP, labor shortages, at least in America, and I think more broadly, in all of the major employment sectors, including government, healthcare, hospitality, traditional retail, construction. It's, almost half the employment in the United States is having trouble with labor. And I'll try to suggest that that's not unrelated to the demographics. We're getting older. The dependence ratios are rising. Fiscal capacity has declined in part because of pandemic programs to protect the economy, which were not a mistake, in a rising interest rate environment. When we're looking at some people say $6 trillion of incremental investment to accomplish the energy transition, tough. Looks pretty tough to me. Something's got to give. And then I'm going to suggest to you, and this I can't be complete, that there will be just massive progress in biomedical and life sciences. They won't show up in GDP numbers, and I won't spend a lot of time on them tonight. But I do think also that we have the potential to have just a massive surge in productivity. And if that's true, and my goal tonight is not to convince you it's true, it's to suggest that it's worth thinking about. It won't come next year, it won't come the year after, but by the end of this decade, you could start to see the impacts of this AI with some qualifications that are important that James Monique at Google and I try to talk about in a recent paper in Foreign Affairs. So that's kind of where I'm going. Now I got to do it fairly efficiently or you'll all go to dinner before I'm done. So there were transitory supply disruptions, and they were correctly diagnosed as transitory, and they are going away. So China was never going to stay in zero COVID, and it's a big enough part of the global manufacturing system that it mattered how long it stayed in zero COVID and when it left. Now, the Chinese economy is struggling for idiosyncratic reasons that we can talk about if you were interested later. The pandemic closures were all over the place. The semiconductor shortages, were really quite severe coming out of the pandemic. They're not all gone, but mostly, subsiding. Ocean shipping costs went from this is for per container across the Pacific, went from $2,000 to $10,000 or $12,000, and they're now back down to $3,000. So the central banks were right in this sense, that and central banks and others, that there were some transitory blockages that were, if you just waited, the private sector and the global economy would sort them out. The problem was there were other secular ones that were operating and that were hidden from view. So my quick story on that, apologies to my colleagues who heard this earlier, is that the great financial crisis and the sovereign debt crisis were huge balance sheet shocks. And different ways. One was mostly public sector, and in the financial sector, in our case in America, it was very much in the household sector. And so we spent a decade with very low interest rates, which may have been the right policy, massive infusions of liquidity in the form of the expansion of central bank balance sheets, and no sign of inflation at all. inflation under targets. How did we get away with that? I mean, there were people at the start of that said, you can't do this, we're going to have runaway inflation, and we didn't. It's because the demand side was suppressed while people rebuilt their balance sheets. So the old people who were going to retire, I mean, this is a little bit sort of, just telling stories, but it's confirmed by the data, decided to wait, stay in the labor market, labor supply didn't go down as fast as we thought, etc. In a world that has these accumulating supply-side problems that I'll describe to you in a minute, if you have a sufficiently negative shock to demand, they won't show up. And then you get to the pandemic, and we reverse course. Europe did not respond with the same degree of austerity. In America, we had a massive program to protect the household sector and the business sector from business failures on the one hand and balance sheet damage on the other as we partially closed down the economy. And it worked because we came out of it. Didn't work immediately because we actually did shut down a fair amount of the economy, but it worked in the sense that when we came out, we got two things at the same time. We got a predictable surge in demand. Everybody knew it was coming, including the central banks. And then we had balance sheets to back it up, right? So unlike the great financial crisis, we came out, humming on the demand side, and the supply side constraints started to show. And it triggered, inflation, central monetary economists and central bankers will tell you there's a lot to inflation and it can develop a life of its own, but usually a trigger is some fairly large problem of excess demand. And so that's what happened. Now, what are these constraints? And maybe this is a bit of a setup. I'm sorry, transitory. Those are the ocean shipping costs. I'll just show you quickly. These things, up, back, down, transitory. But these are the secular trends that strike me, not individually, but when you add them up, as suggesting this is really a different world. So if you think back, so what's the setting? If you think back to the last 30 or 40 years, one of the most important things that characterized them from a global economic point of view was just a massive insertion of productive capacity that went along with the emerging economy growth. And by far the biggest, event or sequence of events in that was China. And that was a deflationary force. If you look at the consumer price indices in most developed countries, what you'll find is the nominal prices of the tradable goods that were associated with that, arrival declined, nominal, right? The real ones were down even further because, you subtract the average rate of inflation. Just a very powerful force. So we lived for a world that had powerful deflationary forces, relatively little problems with inflation. We didn't really have an unemployment problem. It got to feel to the point where people thought, well, this is we got it all right. It's all in balance. But that force is fading, right? There is not another China to insert. Now, there's a lot of underused productive capacity in the global economy, but the question it's a judgment call, and each of you can reach a different conclusion based on your own understanding of various parts of the world, is how fast will it enter the global economy and in what form, right? So if all of Africa's productive potential arrived in a half-decade period, that would make a major, major difference in the supply side of the global economy. I don't think it's very likely. I think it will happen eventually, but not at that pace. And so in the short run, that scale. India is a very large economy. It's the economy the major economy with the highest potential growth in the world right now, because China is now a $13,000 per capita income economy. It can't grow, at 7-8%, which India can. Its per capita income's in the $3,000 to $4,000 range, etc. You can go down that road. It's an interesting road. Not everybody agrees on everything, but it's in my judgment, not very likely. I call this the Lewis turning point. For those of you who know development economics, you know what this means. It means you run out of excess capacity and excess labor in the economy, and the growth engines have to shift to kind of productivity enhancing engines. The global economy is aging. I mentioned it before. It's prone to shocks, and the result of those shocks is two things. On the business side, you see a very rapid process of diversification, including into places that, were more expensive. Now, from the point of view of asset management, this by analogy, it makes perfectly good sense to do this. But it's not cheap. But it's being turbocharged by policy now, for the first time. So the way I think about the world that we lived in when we had that massive insertion of productive capacity, it was a world driven almost entirely by private sector economic incentives, and global supply chains were based on labor arbitrage, efficiency, and comparative advantage. That isn't true anymore. They're based on national security considerations and economic, food, energy, security. And the turbocharging coming from the public sector side is taking the form of some degree of home shoring. We're doing it in America because we do not want to be in the position where the only person who can make the densest semiconductors is on an island in the Pacific off the China coast. That doesn't mean we want to bring it all home. That'd be nuts. But we want to bring enough of it home so if we're forced to expand it, we can. That's what's motivating that. Then you have friendshoring, then you have nearshoring, and you have this diversification process, all in response to shocks, big shocks, multiple sources of shocks, and geopolitical tensions. This is a very expensive process, right? It's just a world, that's not designed to create high elasticity supply-side conditions that are increasingly cheap, as we go along in time. Public debt I mentioned before, declining productivity trends. I'll show you a graph in a minute. But basically, these are the factors. When I sort of add them up, it at least seems to me that it's not that there's no answer to it, but I don't think there's an answer in the next 3 years. And if we stay in this condition, what we're going to have, is slow growth for a fairly long period of time. And a world there where inflation is a threat. And by that I don't mean inflation is out of control. I don't have any doubt whatsoever that the central banks are going to get inflation under control. They're determined, their credibility depends on it, they're smart, they know what they're doing. They may have been a little late to the game, probably for understandable reasons. Mohammed and I disagree a bit on that. He thinks they should have gotten it right a little earlier. But we are going to live in the short run not only with these supply-side constraints, but very rapid interest rate increases into an economy whose financial structures were based on zero interest rates and very low interest rates over a long period of time. There's just going to be a lot of accidents on the way through, like the banking, events that we had in the spring in America when we lost Silicon Valley Bank, a couple of others in my bank, First Republic Bank. I am now the proud owner of 2 deposits at J.P. Morgan Chase. This is the way to exit from that one. Okay, so either that's convincing or not to you, but the consequences are dramatic. Bumpiness, inflation for the first time. This is speculation, but I think this probably means that the new equilibrium real interest rates are going to be higher than they were in that long period before. That means higher interest rates, probably, controlled inflation, whether it's 2 or 3%, I don't know. And we're going to have low growth. Asset prices and multiples are going to be lower if all of this is true. Higher costs of capital, rapidly declining fiscal space because you have high debt and rising interest rates. And the only way you get relief from that is the debt levels come down because you get growth of some kind, or you inflate it away. Central banks aren't going to let it happen, or you shrink the debt. That's kind of the only way out. So that's a picture. It's not very pretty, but now let me I don't have that much time. This is my kind of crude version of the Lewis turning point. For 2 to 3 decades, when we had a surge in demand of any kind from anywhere in the world, at least on the tradable side of the global economy, that's a set of services and, well, it's goods for sure, but services that increasingly trade. By the way, services trade is growing at about 30–40% a year. It's counter to the, the kind of leveling off of the growth. We went for, in this high growth period, this 30-year period, if you looked at trade as a fraction of global GDP, it kept rising and rising. It's flattened out as a fraction. Okay, that means as the global economy grows, it's growing, but the services side is not behaving that way. It's growing like a weed for reasons you can understand. It's enabled by this digital transformation. So that's the Lewis turning point. This is, I told you this before, but this is over 20 years the American Consumer Price Index. And all the blue lines are those tradable goods that, where the inflation rate was essentially negative, right? And that was the deflationary force we talked about before. Productivity is a serious problem. This is probably more than you want to spend time on now.
Stay closer to the mic.
Okay, I'll stay closer to the mic. I'm sorry. This is more than you probably want to process now, but this divides productivity in the American economy in the tradable and non-tradable sector. The blue line's tradable, the orange line's non-tradable. The non-tradable sector is 80% of the employment. It's basically non-tradable services and things like construction. And the gray line's the average, the weighted average. And so what you can see is on the non-tradable side, it's almost a disaster. There's nearly no productivity growth. If you look at the overall economy, it looks like this. In those last 10 years since the great financial crisis, the productivity growth in the economy is under 0.5%. You can't, if you have anything, if you have a supply-constrained situation and your productivity growth is 0.5%, there are severe limits on how much you can grow, period. Not true if the supply side is not the constraint. Okay, yes, never mind this. Here's the aging pattern. This is the aging countries, if I can put it that way, account for more than 3/4 of global GDP. That's only 1/3 of the world's population. So the other 2/3 are pretty young. And at some point, if they grow a lot, they'll reverse this pattern, of sort of aging in the places that produce most of the GDP. India being an example of that, but there are lots of others. But so this isn't a permanent condition, but for the foreseeable future, this aging process is really quite serious. So you have rising dependency ratios. In some cases, you have declining workforces, not percentages, declining absolute workforces. The older people are retiring, and there's huge changes in labor market behavior. The young people there's pretty good data on this, have decided not to work. They like working at home some of the week. They don't want to work where it's inflexible, or you have to be there all the time, or it's stressful, or it's dangerous, or it's low paid. I don't blame them. So they're not working there, right? And those are the places that have labor shortages, and we will probably have fairly big, relative price adjustments associated with that, et cetera. This is just more labor market data in case you're interested. Work from home the hybrid model seems to have kind of installed itself in the places where it's possible. I don't know what your experience in New York was, but I've been told don't even bother going to the office on Friday. They won't be there, something like that. I think it's a big change, one of the many. And these are the labor shortages. We don't have time to it doesn't matter as long as you get the idea. And here's the sovereign debt. So sovereign debt went up around the financial crisis, drifted up after that, not down. And then the pandemic produced another big increment because countries had to do this to basically protect their economy. One of the side effects of this is that the lower income countries are in desperate trouble because they used the limited fiscal capacity they had to protect the economy or to try to protect it from the severe shock of the pandemic. Not just the health, but the employment and economic activity shock. And they're basically defenseless now. and subject to these climate shifts and so on. I mean, you all know this, but when you look at the data, it confirms that this is the first time in my 20 years of thinking about developing country growth that I have thought the convergence process may fail. That there's actually a subset of countries that, unless they get significant help, won't be able to withstand the combination of external shocks being delivered and the normal challenges of, generating and jump-starting growth. All right. Enough of the pessimism. Yeah. All right. So you've probably noticed this. The global economy's center of gravity is shifting to Asia. It's actually, in the ocean between India and Thailand right now. Nanny Qua does this calculation, and it's interesting. It used to be in Turkey. So this is a big change. And the only thing I would tell you about this is not just GDP, but if you're in business or finance, it's where the money is and where the demand is. And it just didn't used to be true. So it has caused, a kind of multinational rethink. Not always, I got to be in every corner of the world, but to take a recent example, these financial trends that the panel, wonderfully illuminated before, one of them is that, there's a real funding problem at the level of private equities operating globally. And where are they all? Guess. They're in the Middle East. Because the Middle East has somewhere between $1.5 and $2 trillion of incremental, revenues, right? As a result of the, turbulence and the higher energy prices and so on. So they're there. And then we have these digital transformations. So what I want to do now, and then I'll close a little bit on AI, is convince you that this isn't just sort of talk. It's being driven by really powerful technologies and tools that are not only exist, but their costs are coming down so fast, and the power is increasing so much that they're accessible all over the world, right? And so if you take that message along with, just the innovation that went with them, then you've got the tools to drive extraordinary entrepreneurial activity and technology innovation. And at least part of it, I think, is likely. So solar costs are, somewhere between 5 and 10 times less expensive than they were 15 years ago. So it wasn't even remotely competitive with any fossil fuel 15 years ago. Now it is. Now you need smart grids and, battery storage when the sun doesn't shine and all kinds of stuff that gets talked about correctly in the energy transition costs. This is Taiwan Semiconductor map, and these are basically nanometer separation. So if you have an advanced, relatively recent iPhone in your pocket, the semiconductor in that is a 3 nanometer chip. It has 291 million transistors, meaning switches per square millimeter on that chip. It's a supercomputer by even 1990 standards. And, I don't know how much further this is going to go, but everybody knows this. This is Moore's Law. But it is powering the AI transformation. The neural network model that Jeff Hinton and others worked out many years ago, you couldn't test it because you didn't have enough data that was in digital form, but mostly you didn't have enough computing power to do it. It's this kind of thing, and the NVIDIA chips and the chips that are designed for AI training models that are enabling, what we're actually now seeing. Not the theory. The theory we had before, just couldn't implement it. It's a little scary that there aren't many. Samsung is the only one who's close to being able to do this. They all rely on ASML in the Netherlands, and the design, at least in the cell phone area, relies on a British firm named ARM. These are the AI breakthroughs. So we had, can you read this from out there? So we had handwriting recognition, came up pretty fast, then speech recognition. Image recognition was stunningly quick. because they were trying to do it without AI, without the neural network models. And then they kind of gave up on that and said, we can't describe how you recognize a cat. We'll just let the thing look at, several million images and it'll figure it out. And it does. But it means we don't know how it figures it out. So one of the things I'm not sure came up in the previous panel that's important, and I'll leave you with, is these things are stunningly good prediction machines, but we don't know how they do it. It's too complicated. And so if for regulatory and other purposes, and just, control, we're going to have to, and this has started, learn how to reverse engineer what they did. That is to figure out how they came to the conclusion, right? And that's a project. I think that's really hard to do, but that's a project. And then you see reading comprehension, and then the large language models at the end that just burst on this. This is a little inaccurate. I know that the seminal paper that was written by people at Google that started the sort of Gen AI breakthroughs was written in 2017. I tried to read it, and I couldn't. It's too technical. There's too much jargon in it that comes from that world. As I said before, I don't think anybody thinks we're through with this. But this combination of things is enormously powerful. Image recognition, is, well, how it's used, on phones. It has a dangerous downside. You can use it to run a surveillance state. You can't have an autonomous vehicle that can't see, right, and recognize what it's seeing, etc. They all have enormous ramifications. This is the, Fei-Fei Li's, image recognition. And then I asked ChatGPT, I'll leave this behind because you probably can't read it. I asked ChatGPT, what would happen if Columbus came to the United States now? Pretty good answer. This one I love because I think this will, these people, DeepMind, owned now by Google, as of the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, are famous for mastering the game of Go in 2 rounds. They figured out how to play it better than human beings, and then they got even better because they basically got it to play against itself. And now it figured out strategies humans had never thought about. But the next project they undertook is called AlphaFold. Now, I hope I'm not going to bore you, but this is biology. And so one of the things that happens in biology is that, you have to figure out what proteins look like. Proteins are defined by a sequence of amino acids, and it's very hard work. But you have to know this because it determines what the protein binds to. So it's essential in vaccines and drug development and so on. So they set themselves the goal of predicting. These are all prediction machines. The 3-dimensional structure of proteins. And after a couple of years of hard work, they actually succeeded, meaning they produced pretty good predictions. Their initial tests, were strikingly good. People got the wind of it and sent some in and, tested them. Sent ones in they already knew just to see if it came back with the same answer, etc. Anyway, once they perfected this, they took the 200 million known proteins in the world and predicted their 3-dimensional structures and published it in open source, meaning anybody in this field can go look up any known protein's predicted 3-dimensional structure as a starting point. No, I just can't believe. I mean, this is a different kind of productivity, but this takes somewhere between weeks and months in a lab to do, just to get to the kind of your initial prediction. I can't believe this won't be one of the elements that accelerates, stunningly rapid change in the biomedical and life sciences. And it's my favorite example. This is DNA sequencing. It started out, the cost went, I think the first round was 10 million. It's now approaching $250 per complete sequence. And the white line is what the cost would have been if it had behaved like Moore's law in semiconductors. So it did for a while and then dropped like a stone. So this is just core technology in the life sciences that is now accessible basically to anybody who has the competence to do the kind of research in this area. I'll keep going. For those of you who haven't read Walter Isaacson's book, it's called The Code Breaker. It's about one of these two women. They are the women who won the Nobel Prize for discovering gene editing, the biological basis of gene editing, which is bacteria. And her name's Jennifer Doudna, and the other one is Emmanuelle Charpentier. And this one is my favorite. These two people are the ones who discovered, because they were looking for ways to deal with cancer, the messenger RNA technology, and they received the Nobel Prize in Medicine this year. And what's interesting about them is they collaborated over many years as they were on the periphery of science, struggled to get funding, right? But just kept at it and so on. It's just a wonderful, and it's so nice to see their recognition. Anyway, I mean, there are a lot of stories like this, but I think you can see this is the global explosion of entrepreneurial activity, etc. So what do I want to say about this? Let me just conclude by saying I think these things make the latter part of this decade, whether you're looking at inclusive growth models or growth in general, or productivity, or advances in the life sciences with an inclusive component. There's all kinds of possibilities, too many to kind of talk about, in kind of one session. But let me give one example. With the phone in your pocket, you can take pictures of your skin. The AIs can pick, with reasonable accuracy, likely locations of cancer by type of cancer on your skin. Is it as good as a dermatologist? No. Certainly not the best dermatologist. Are you all living in Rome not going to go see the dermatologist? No. But 85% of the world's population doesn't live near a dermatologist. And this, as an element of preventive primary care, is a substitute for what would have been nothing, okay? Because they're not going to travel 100 kilometers to the dermatologist speculating they might have a problem until there's a technology that tells them they do. And that story is written over and over again in e-commerce, in fintech, in payment systems. Microfinance is now a viable, profitable business because it's built on digital foundations. Now, sure, it has to be regulated, and yes, it can be misused, and are there dangers? But this story is getting written over and over again. So my prediction, and I'll spend a little time on AI and the productivity story, is by the time we get to the end of this decade, because none of this stuff happens, overnight, but the cumulative effect will make it feel like a very different world than the one we're living in. And I'm hoping to live long enough to see at least some of the fruits of this. Now, let me talk about AI and productivity. It does probably have the potential to produce, and now I'm specifically talking about Gen AI. So yes, it does, as was said, process qualitative information. So there's a massive increment in the kinds of information that you can add to the sort of data analytics, with respect to quantitative information. Second, it's the first day technology ever to have domain switching capabilities. Image recognition's fine if you're recognizing images. Computer coding's fine if you're computer coding. But this stuff, you can ask it about the Italian Renaissance, switch to math, switch to computer coding, and you don't have to tell it what the new domain is. And it's that almost human-like characteristic that leads people to believe this is one step in the direction of artificial general intelligence. Now, I have no idea, even what that means. And I know the AI people think artificial general intelligence is somewhere between 10 years from now and never, which is a fairly big range. But in the meantime, you have a domain switching capability that has one other characteristic, and that is you essentially need no technical training to use it. Anybody can ask it. ChatGPT had 100 million users in the first 2 months. That's never happened with any technology. And so what we're in is, and you heard it in the panel before, this period of intense exploration and experimentation. But what I see, and what other people see every time they turn around, is applications of it pretty much across the entire economy. So if we're going to get a productivity surge, it'll be because it is across the entire economy, and not just in the financial sector or the tech sector or computer coding or whatnot. Why is this likely? Well, let me give a couple of examples and then I'll stop. Eric Brynjolfsson and colleagues at Stanford, he's the head of the Digital Economy Lab, did a study on a project that a company and a consulting firm did, and the context is customer service. And I mention this because I think it's, including in the financial sector, going to be one of the main applications. And what they did is they took, this is a tech sector, so the customer service people were answering questions like, why can't I connect to the network, right? Or why can't, I see the printer and stuff. And so they took thousands and thousands of hours of recorded conversations, audio, recorded conversations of customer service, customer interactions, and fed it into the AI along with, obvious metrics. Did they solve the problem? How long did it take the agent to solve the problem? Did they make the customer really angry, etc.? By the way, the AI can tell, if the customer's really angry. And then the AI started telling people what to do. It's a powerful digital assistant. They didn't replace the agents. They gave half of them the AI, and the other half were deprived of it. The productivity effect immediately was 14%. But the most interesting thing that they observed is that, as you would guess, there's a spectrum of performance across agents that's highly correlated with experience, right? So the most experienced ones had kind of seen everything, and the least experienced ones had to sort of struggle with it, and they had all kinds of manuals and stuff that don't work very well. So when they gave the AI to the 50%, they made sure the spectrum was there. Now guess where the biggest effect was? It was noticeable up here, but was huge down here. It's like having a powerful digital assistant that takes you down the learning curve really quickly. I call this, a number of people call it the leveling up effect. The elimination of, fairly dramatic differentials in performance as a result of having this digital assistant by your side. Several things have to happen in order for this thing to really work. One, there's a really powerful automation bias. And it comes from, according to Eric Brynjolfsson, again, wrote an influential paper in a Daedalus volume, which I highly recommend on AI. It's sort of got all the major players in it, and even some minor ones like me. And basically he said Alan Turing proposed that we evaluate progress in AI by asking the following question. Can we produce a machine that when it interacts with a human, the human thinks it's interacting with another human? Pretty high bar. Everybody said yeah. And so far, we've kind of inched in that direction. Almost all AIs are benchmarked against human performance, right? Everything I showed you before. When did image recognition pass humans? When did the Gen AI beat the average law school LSAT test taker, right? And it's not a silly way to do it. It's a small step in the kind of Alan Turing direction. But the next step is the dangerous one. And it's, well, once the AI passes the human, why don't we get rid of the human? That's the automation bias. And it's really unwise. Why? Because not only it makes this thing scary, but it's not the right way to deploy them. These are prediction machines. They make mistakes. They hallucinate. They make stuff up. That's what hallucination means in that world. And there's lots of examples of it. I mean, James Manica told me that they asked Bard, that's Google's ChatGPT, to write an essay on inflation. And it did. Pretty good. Probably get a B- in your course. And at the end it said, if you're interested, you could read the following 5 papers and books with plausible sounding titles and whatnot. Not a single one existed. Just made them up. A lawyer in America got a hold of ChatGPT. I can't believe this one, but it's true. Got a hold of ChatGPT, decided it was a pretty good way to economize on his own time in writing a legal brief for a court. So it told ChatGPT what he wanted, and he, in this case, and it wrote the legal brief, and he handed it in. every single legal precedent cited in that brief didn't exist. So this gentleman is in serious trouble. And those are going to be object lessons, and people are not going to do this. The best use of these technologies is you can describe it either as a powerful digital assistant, not just to people, but systems, right? And or human-machine collaboration. When I say systems, one of the superhuman capabilities, you've probably noticed by now that sometimes the machine's superhuman, sometimes it's about the same as us, sometimes it's subhuman but has useful uses because there's a limited number of us. They're all interesting in different kind of applications that aren't very well categorized yet in the literature, including the economics literature, but we'll get there. Basically the best use of these things is as assistance to something. Banks, I think, will find a way to use it in customer service. I know that there are financial firms that are experimenting with having an AI be a member of the investment committee, using qualitative information based on past decisions. They're not turning over to the AI. They're just testing themselves to see if they're missing something and see how it's part of the experimentation. Big firms in supply chains, global supply chains, are starting to try to use Gen AI to take these incredibly complex systems and make them seem more transparent. You basically can't see into them, and humans don't have the processing power to be able to do it. If they succeed in that, and they become more transparent, they'll become more efficient. You'll have less of the bullwhip effect and delayed responses of the type we saw in the pandemic. I remember when people, the pandemic hit, and people sort of ordered the stuff they needed to sell for Christmas in September, and all of a sudden they said, well, we can't do it. You should have ordered it last spring, right? If you can see into the system, you can anticipate that and to some extent get around the disruptions. So the bottom line is, the last thing on this front is, if we avoid the AI bias, we cannot allow markets to determine the speed of diffusion of this. The big players will experiment and invest. The small and medium-sized businesses will be stuck on the sidelines, and there's a role for government, in diffusion. And it's really important. It's really important. And right now, this is the kind of final thought, I think the policy discussion around AI is way too heavily tipped toward the negative. I don't have any problem with the notion that there's these big risks and misuses and whatnot that deserve attention, for sure. But the other side, which is how are we going to make sure this is as accessible and available to as many people and companies and cases, both domestically initially and then eventually internationally, seems to be just incredibly important. And so what James and I were simply arguing for was a kind of rebalancing and adding to the upside side of the policy. That's it. Might look better.
Well, thank you very, very much, Mike, for this insightful, thought-provoking lesson, I would say, because it really has been a lesson, not just a keynote address, much more. I think it testifies, just like your book, a Latin saying, that is that when you know what you're talking about, you can make anything very, very simple, and you can create lots of interconnections, and I'm sure that you really provided food for thought for all our students and also for everyone here. In Latin, it's rem tene verba sequentur. I think that the lagging mindsets you put on one of the slides hopefully are not going to be here and are not going to be with us in the future. So very much thank you again, Mike. Thank you for being here the second time. In Italian we say non c'è il due senza il tre, which means that hopefully we will be able to invite you again next year, third time lucky, as they say in English. Thank you very much, everybody. Big round of applause for Mike. And of course, the conference tomorrow continues, and we're going to start very early at 8:30 with Erkki Likanen, who has just left. And oh, sorry. And there is an important thing that we must give you, Mike. Everybody sit down, because today I'm forgetting everything. Yes, one sec. We don't have it. We have it. And of course, we're on live TV, so these things do go wrong. No, we have a question from Gianluca. See? And since I'm very much for gender equality, can one of the girls think up a question? Where is Mariana, Giuditta, you know? Right, Gianluca. He's an economics student.
Thank you for your speech. It was really enlightening, I would say. And I wanted to ask a question about the regulation of AI. Whether you think that it would be better to have an open source approach, so the AI models are basically left free, so every one of us can actually access to the data and the algorithm, and these could have negative implication, because if you think about some negative actors that can use AI to produce, for example, pathogens, or it would be better to have a top-down approach in which corporations and governments keep their patents, and they basically control the source of the AI. Thank you.
Well, that's a great question. So, in a sense, that's what we're trying to figure out, right? So I don't know. I mean, a lot of thoughtful people are kind of working on this. I think it's got multiple parts, so I just very briefly. We definitely need treaties on the use of AI in warfare. We have them in biological and nuclear and chemical weapons, and we need them here. They're just too powerful. And I think it's right that we should probably not allow, warfare without kind of human intervention. So that's one step. Then there are a whole bunch of real issues. So some of the data privacy and whatnot, I think, are not new, because we had them before. And that doesn't mean they're unimportant. We just got to figure out what's responsible and secure use of data. The copyright things are really important, because these things at light speed read everybody's, whatnot, and then make up, novels, essays, securities analysis, whatever. And, we got to figure out, how the copyright works in this new world. Now, almost every artists and writers always read other people's stuff before, so we got to figure out, how's this different? Is it different because it's a machine? Reading it and repackaging it and whatnot, I don't know. But that's what the Hollywood strikes are about, and we can't just sort of skip it. On the top-down versus bottom-up, and then we've got, the fact that there's only about 10 entities in the world that have a big enough cloud computing system to train a generative AI model on the full internet. And that's a little scary, because they have a lot of power. So OpenAI is powered by Microsoft, that's one of them. Google's one, Meta's one, Amazon is surely one, Alibaba, Baidu, Tencent are in this category, but it's not a long list, and there aren't any here in Europe yet. So we've got to work out the model. It looks like the direction they're going is they're not trying to kind of make profits on everything, but rather build ecosystems by having APIs where you use the platform to build your own, vertical use case kind of. And that's not a bad way to go. But anyway, competition policy vigilance is a good idea as well. I haven't read the just released European, whatever it's called, directive on AI, so I can't comment with any knowledgeability on that. But I have no reason to think it's nuts. It's maybe a little biased, in favor of protection and against innovation, just because of where the innovation's kind of occurring at the moment. But I'll take a look at it and see. Bottom line is, I don't think we have a fully worked out regulatory strategy anywhere. But then one thing I think you can count on is it'll be different. So it will not look the same in China as it does in the United States, and probably United States and Europe won't go down the same path either, because of differences in underlying sort of values and at the margin and governance structures. And that's going to complicate the global economy, right? Well, we haven't even sorted out data portability. And the trend is, and this has nothing to do with AI, that we're just running global supply chains. If you got enough restrictions that say the data has to be housed locally and cannot cross the border, the digital data, then it's so hard to know how you run a global supply chain where the digital data is the coordinating mechanism. So we're working on it. I mean, somebody's working on it, and a lot of people are working on it, but we don't have good answers to that. I think it's a multi-dimensional problem. Yeah. You guys can skip the aperitivo.
Sorry, but I don't always have the possibility to interact with the Nobel Prize, so I would take the chance. And I think that there's a big confrontation between two systems. The European, maybe in Europe we don't have a lot of AI-based startups and companies, but there's a confrontation between China, which adopts a top-down approach, and on the other hand, United States. And these two systems confront themselves, and this could lead also to some kind of threat for our economy. Do you think this is the case?
No. So to get the innovation, the Chinese system, you can't do it top-down, and the government won't do it. And one of their problems now is that they've kind of knocked the confidence out of the private sector, and they probably slowed themselves down, including in this area, because one of the heaviest knocks came in the digital area in the last 3 to 4 years. So, I mean, that's not an unfixable problem, but there is an inevitable bottom up. Now, what has happened is this. In the world of AI, even 5 years ago, the AI people in China and India and the United States were all talking to each other. Now they can't. It is completely blocked off, at least on the American-Chinese side. I asked a senior AI researcher if this individual would like to come to a conference on the economic impact of AI in China. And this individual looked at me and said, "Are you crazy? Right? Me? Go to China?" Or one of those folks, at the same level. And there's a ton of top-flight researchers coming here. I mean, just ain't going to happen. So that's a very big change. But it's all in the kind of bottom-up, scientific, sort of milieu where this stuff comes from. But from a regulatory point of view, the Chinese may, move faster, but it's got to be top-down. I mean, only governments can defend, what they deem to be important social values that need to be embedded in the way, the rules and regulations that govern these things. So I know there'll be differences, but I guess the way I responded to your question is I don't think innovation systems are ever top-down, and regulatory regimes are never bottom-up. I guess this is the short version of my response. I hope that helps.
So, thank you very much again. And now we have a little token of our gratitude. Where is Professor Lagasio?
So I have this privilege. Yes.
Oh, my goodness.
Let's put Mike in the middle. And that's this prize.
Oh, look. This is beautiful. Thank you so much.